it makes me question if USDA's corn estimates were quite as lofty as what they really were.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlon Boulding with you. Appreciate you joining us here today as we take a look at conditions in South America with my very special guest. We have Matthew Kruse, the president of Comstock Investments, with us today. And well, this is something that, Matthew, I hope we can do this each and every week around Tuesday. May vary a day or so each week, but I thought it was important that we talk about the development of the South American crop. We touched on it last week, kind of set the stage, if you will, for the early growing season here. So this time, I want to see if you have an update for us about how the planting season is going, how the first season of corn is coming along here so far. So what have you heard lately?
Starting on the soybeans, we left off last week talking about how there was a slow start, but we felt like things were going to really accelerate. And I guesstimated that they might plant as much as 15% last week. And I was low. They actually planted closer to 20%. And so accelerate they are, and so there's one chart that we're sharing kind of showing the planting speed. And so it's, in the state of Mato Grosso, they're already close to 60% planted. And a lot of traders use that state as a reference just because it's so large. The state of Paraná, which kind of struggles for second or third place in terms of largest production state, they're already at like 75% planted. And so it's picking up to the point where if they plant another 20%, they'll already be back within that historical range. And so as we kind of alluded to last week, I said that, while they're starting out maybe a week behind schedule, they're likely going to end within the historical range. And it appears that's what's happening. In the case of the first crop corn, that continues to go in on schedule. Most of that is located in the southern part of Brazil. This week, they're pretty dry, and so I think that'll help speed up the planting there, but they've had some really good moisture there up until this week. And I don't know that it's cause for too much concern because there is some, I think starting next week, there's kind of a return to rainfall in the south. But, again, the first crop corn is not as nearly as significant as the second crop of corn, but it's still, when ending stocks are tight, can still make a difference. And so I think for the most part, a lot of those states like Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, where a lot of that first crop corn is, they're getting close to the end of the first crop corn, and like Minas Gerais, I think is now the largest first crop corn producer. They're still in their early stages yet. They got a ways to go.
I saw where you also provided a graphic here. Let me bring this up. This has to do with recent rainfall, I believe, the accumulations over, what is this, for the entire month of October here?
We're not quite done with October, but kind of through the 27th of October, you kind of see the rainfall that's accumulated at the start of the rainy season. You can kind of see in the heaviest areas there have been in that Goiás there. Is that in the center arrow there that they've had, close to 8 inches. Now, Goiás, I want to say, is like the fourth largest soybean producing state. So they're not huge, but they're still important. Kind of the center part of Mato Grosso there, the top left, they've had some good rains, but it's really not been widespread yet, reaching kind of across the state. And then also in the, in the south there, you can see the bottom one there, Rio Grande do Sul and Paraná. Those states have had very good rainfall. And so that's why this week it's, they've kind of, there isn't really any rainfall forecast, but since they've had good soil moisture build up to this point, it's not much of a concern. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what's happened here at the start of the rainy season.
Take a look here at some weather forecasts. This one is for, what is this, the day before Election Day here. This is interesting. Now, I take it on this map, the red indicates where the heaviest rain is. Is that right?
That's right. I think a lot of where the darker red, can be, 2 to 4 inches in that area. So the real dark area is probably 4 inches. And so this kind of shows you pretty much everywhere in the northern tier of Brazil for, between now, for this whole week here that we're talking, up until next Monday, is going to get some sort of rainfall, probably 1.5 to 2 inches on the low end and 4 inches on the high end. And so that's on top of what we just showed you in the previous month of October. So, this makes up, what you're looking at, close to 70% of Brazil's production. So, pretty good general widespread soaking rains are happening this week to some extent. And so that's why I think why you're seeing pressure on the market, that overall there's really no stress areas for the moment in the primary Brazil growing areas.
It's going to be hard to get that lid off the market, I would think, if that's the case. Really not much weather premium that's needed right now.
No, not really.
Okay, let's go out after a month, I think.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give you a different perspective, looking out. Obviously, the further you go out, the less accurate they are. And so this is a 46-day anomaly, weather anomaly for precipitation there in South America. This goes out to mid-December, and it's showing you that for the most part in those central areas, and even in the southern Brazil, there's going to be adequate to above average rainfall. That's what this European model is forecasting. Now, in those northeast regions we talked about last week, that's where you see the dry areas. And so those areas should maybe be on the lookout. And, they usually plant those areas later. And so, if I'm a farmer in those areas looking at that, I'm going to say I'm going to maybe tiptoe into the planting season, because it's looking to be pretty dry here starting now.
Have you heard much in the way of forecasts for the neighboring country of Argentina there?
So far they've had pretty good rainfall as well. Because the primary growing areas in Argentina, like Cordoba and Buenos Aires, they are kind of on the same latitude as Rio Grande do Sul. And so as a general statement, if southern Brazil is getting good precipitation, so is Argentina. And so up until this week, they've been having very good precipitation, and so this week they've kind of gone a little bit drier. But again, it looks like next week we'll see a return of some more precipitation. And so I think in those growing areas, for the time being, things are looking pretty positive.
So let's talk about once again what the expected acreage increase was guessed to be this year in the 2024 and 2025 growing season for Brazil. How much increase do you think they were planning on now?
Again, if you go off of, the CONAB or USDA, it depends a little bit about who you're talking about, but, CONAB is looking for a 2.8% increase. You're looking at close to 3 million more acres at those levels. Perhaps USDA is just a little bit more aggressive there, looking for slightly more than that than what CONAB is. And so that's what there's a lot of debate about right now, is how many acres are they going to increase. I think everyone agrees that there's going to be a slowing this year of acreage expansion, just because there's low commodity prices. And I was doing the calculations for our report comes out tomorrow about this subject, that the average margins are negative, not by much, but they came out to like $10 an acre negative in Mato Grosso, using average yields and average costs and all that. And so it doesn't exactly, incentivize growers to maximize and expand right now. And so that's why I think that, oddly enough, I talked about how the USDA's ag attaché in Brazil, they have the lowest estimate for acreage expansion, and so the USDA's guy in Brazil doesn't even agree with the home office with the numbers that they're coming out with, and he was at 161 million metric tons, and USDA is at 169. So it's 8 million metric tons difference within basically the home office that everyone looks to and their guy on the ground that's supposedly they're relying on. And so I don't quite understand that, but it's a pretty big gap between within their own organization.
That's a good point. Well, I tell you what, I mentioned yesterday on a Facebook grain market discussion group that I would be talking to you today, and I know I was putting the comment on there that I would welcome any questions that anybody had that they would like us to address. And one of the questions that came in was from Jane Nichols, and I thought he had a good question. So you kind of touched on this a little bit ago about the increase in acres this year. But just because of the way the economy is and everything, maybe the gains in acreage weren't as much as what you would normally think. However, you and I have talked in the past about the vast potential that that country still has to expand acreage. I mean, they have a lot of room to go yet, don't they?
Probably the number one question I get a lot is how many more acres do they really have, right? Because if the U.S. planted, 87 million acres and of soybeans, and Brazil is last season was at 114, and now they're going to go to 117 million acres. I mean, at what point do they stop? Where they run out of soybean acres? And there's been a lot of organizations over the years that have tried to do analysis and studies to come up with a number, and I think they'll continue to do that over the years. I don't think that question is going to go away anytime soon, and so every other year, you're going to see some organization try and come out with an estimate on what that is. But some of the more trustworthy estimates that I've seen show that there's maybe as many as 80 million acres that could theoretically be put into row crop production. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's all high quality row crop production. It could be in a lot of these fringe areas, or it's sandier soils, or not as productive. And so the one study said that there's probably 40 million good acres that could be added yet. And so now that's not going to happen all at once, and nor will the market be able to absorb an increase like that. But it could happen over the next, 15 years or so, 20 years. And so, so if I had to guess based off of the studies I've seen, I would say at least another 40 million acres. And depending on, where prices are at 15 or 20 years from now, it could be more than that. So, the next question people have is, where is all that coming from? Right. And the studies made it clear that is not coming from deforestation in the Amazon, which that's where a lot of people assume. Those numbers, that 40 million acres of good quality land and 80 million acres in total, that's just coming from pasture coming, that's being converted to row crop. And so there's a tremendous amount of pasture in Brazil. Brazil has I think the highest number of head of cattle in the world. They don't produce as much beef as the United States, because they use they're not as efficient. They're using the pasture type systems more than the confinement that we use. But there's a lot of land available. You still see it driving in Mato Grosso that, and frankly, the land's just worth more on the open market as a row crop farm versus a pasture farm. And so that's where you're going to continue to see that being converted. And so, it's not long term. It's it's an issue that's not going away, and they're not running out of land anytime soon.
So maybe over the next couple of decades, we'll see maybe a reciprocal turn where we gain soybean acres, but maybe lose some cattle production down there. Then
yes and no. I think people ask that same question too. I mean, I think that maybe you lose cattle head, but a lot of those cattle, I think you're seeing an increase. They get converted to confinement. And so the beef production number still stays the same or can go up. But I don't, the cattle numbers, the number of head might actually go down, but doesn't necessarily mean the beef production will drop.
Interesting stuff. All right. Now we have another screen to take a look at here. Let's go to this one. And this happens to be global corn prices. FOB in the U.S. in dollars per million metric tons, or per metric ton. Let's take a look at this here. Explain what we're looking at with the different colored lines on this graph.
Well, I just wanted to kind of demonstrate that how competitive that U.S. corn is right now, and that's a big part of why we're seeing strong exports. Last week we saw a lot of daily announcements that were near records, and why I still think that we'll see continued adjustments in additional USDA reports where they adjust the export numbers higher. That this is kind of unusual, where Brazil really just wrapped up their harvest, their second crop corn harvest in August, and then they typically dominate the global export market for the following 6 months, kind of into January, almost into February of the following year. It's kind of unusual this year where our corn is competitively priced, and that's what this chart shows, that we're about 10 cents a bushel below what Brazil is for foreign buyers when comparing U.S. Gulf prices to Brazil port prices, and that's what we're attempting to show here. As I said, it's kind of strange for this time of year. Spot prices in Brazil domestically have shot up to the point where they're pretty much on par with the CBOT right now, which is very unusual, I think, for this time of year. Now, it usually happens later in the year, but the fact that they're still supposed to be relatively flush with corn, and so it's just kind of surprising, I guess, this time of year, and why I think you'll continue to see U.S. corn exports flourish. If it's already happening this part of the year, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One, Brazil is consuming more of their corn domestically with the ethanol plants. Two, it makes me question if USDA's corn estimates were quite as lofty as what they really were. That's kind of the main culprit, is right. If basis levels are so high in Brazil for this time of year, which is unusual, where's all the corn, where that USDA estimated at? And so some of those gaps that don't get closed, we talked about that last week, those between USDA and CONAB, and they may never get closed, but sooner or later it gets reflected in the local basis. That's the buyers and the co-ops are running out of corn and they're bidding it up. That's what's happening.
Matthew, with Argentina bringing up the rear at 211, it says, is that just a function of their new president and the realigning of their economy that he's been doing?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. But they're kind of a distant third place or fourth place, depending on the year. I think Ukraine, I didn't put Ukraine on here. Ukraine might be even a little bit more competitive than they are, but they're not, as for obvious reasons, that they're in the middle of a war with Russia, they're not as reliable as a supplier. And so the point is that right now the United States is the cheapest, most reliable supplier in the world. And so that's going to help. We kind of have the wind at our back right now.
Where do we go from here, Matthew, on the growing season in Brazil as we get into next week? What are the farmers there going to be working on?
I think they're still going to be planting. It's still early, as I talked about. A lot of growing season left. I think a lot of planting is going to move further north, northeast. And then is also further south. So it's kind of the center west regions that get planted first, as we talked about. You'll see Paraná probably get down to their last 10% next week, and Mato Grosso will be 2/3 to 3/4 planted by next week. So it's really, once we get past planting, market's going to look out further into December, January, which are probably more the critical growing periods, when some of the soybeans, earlier planted soybeans, are starting to fill their pods, things like that. And so a lot of growing season left, and so we'll just continue to watch the weather. That's the biggest thing right now.
When would we see the first early corn coming out?
You could see harvest for some of the very first stuff by I suppose late December, early January. It's small quantities. I don't think it's much of a market mover, because it's smaller quantities, and because most of that first crop is consumed domestically in Brazil. It doesn't go for export. That's why the market looks quite a bit more at the second crop corn. But obviously, if they don't produce a first crop, they might have to borrow from the second crop to keep things running. But yeah, you could still see some corn being harvested there in January.
Are you still looking at second crop corn being delayed quite a bit, or did they catch up?
Since they're catching up, I don't think it's as big of a concern right now. They started a week behind, but it looks like they're going to catch up here in the next 10 days. And so I don't see much of a concern there yet. But like I said, there's still a long ways to go.
Well, I appreciate you joining us here, Matthew. Always good to visit with you and get your perspective on what's going on down there, since you have family ties in Brazil with farming operations there. I just want to remind everybody that we did have a little bit of discussion on the Facebook grain market discussion group. That was interesting. And also, I look forward to the comments that everybody posts below these videos. So if you have something that you would like for Matthew and I to discuss next week, post them in the comments below, and we'll keep tabs on that, and we'll try and answer your questions next time we talk. Well, that'll do it for this particular episode with Matthew Kruse. Appreciate you joining us. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlon Bowling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.